and welcome back to Model Kit Stuff, and we are on part 2 of our First World War German U-boat build by Das Works. Okay, so we're now on page 5, step 2, and what we're doing is we're assembling some parts that go underneath the top deck. So let's have a look at where we're up to and my thoughts on that so far. So first thing is we have dry fitted the deck in place, and I wanted to have a look at that just to get an understanding of how good the fit was, because essentially this all gets painted in this very dark grey, but the two edges which are part of the hull, if I just pop this out, you can see there, no you can't there, those edges all the way up here are the light grey. So we have two light grey edges which trim the deck. So having fitted this, I've decided I'm going to paint this deck separately before we stick it in, because the fit is actually nice and tight all the way along. There's no issues at all. Well, at least no issues with the fit. Until you get to the end here, and you can probably see that, bring it a bit closer to the camera for you, there is a sizable gap here at the end. Now I've still got to clean all this up, which we will do off camera at some point, but what my thought process is to, rather than gluing this in and then filling it and touching up, is what we're going to do is we're going to shim that with some white plastic card, so that I can glue that in place, lift the deck out, and then we can sand it all flush, and it becomes part of this, the part of the hull rather than part of the deck, and we fill the gap before we put the deck in, is my thought process there. So we'll perhaps have a look at that before the end of this video. Right, let's just talk about the deck itself. It's a single piece deck. It's a huge single moulding. The detail on it is really nice. There's lots and lots of panel lines, there's some sunken rivets. It's just really nice, and we know that when we come to do a little bit of weathering, we've got lots of recesses and bits there to hold washers and bits and pieces. So I have no problems with that at all. What I have a problem with is there is two support ribs underneath. I'm going to take this off and show you. Clicks in at the back end and it's a bit tight. There we go. So the construction underneath is these two big ribs that run the full length of the deck, and they've done that, I'm guessing, to add a bit of rigidity, but the upshot is running the full length of the deck on both sides is a sink mark, and that's going to be a pig to clean out. It's going to show under paint, even though it's a dark paint. It's going to show under paint. You've got a possibility of it spoiling any washers and wash settling in it if you don't fill it. So I need to think about whether I'm going to fill it or not, and that pretty much runs the full length on both sides. Now for me, it would have been better to make that deck, as you've got plenty of panel lines, make the deck in sections, then you wouldn't have needed that support underneath, I don't believe. You could possibly even have put rib support in the top half. So anyway, for me, that would have resolved the sink part. You could have even built the conning tower up on its deck and plopped it in. Anyway, that's the only drawback with the deck. There's quite a lot of sink in it that is going to be obvious under paint. But the fit of the deck is really good. It just pretty much clicks into place and then just sits there without any glue. So that's the deck bit. Now we have these two. There's two of these to make, which go into these two holes here. So they go on the underside of those two holes. I've made one up, so that's it when it's completed, and it's made up of 3 parts. So what we do is, that's the bottom bit. You can't make them up wrong because they've formed them in a way that they can only be built up in one. And then there's a top piece that goes on top. Just get the right way around, like that. Now the fit is quite loose. You can see the parts wobble a bit, but if you get them lined up, squeeze them together with your fingers, then you can simply just run some glue into the joints. What I've found is, because these parts are internal, you don't really need to clean them up. You don't need to worry about getting rid of the nubs from the sprue tabs. What I will do is just clean up those on either side of the very top piece, just to make sure that it's not fouling anything when we glue it in place. So they were nice and simple to build. Now let's have a chat about this part here. So this is B27, B31. So I have no issue with the part. It's really nice. It's 2 pieces that come together. If I can just separate them, 2 pieces that come together. They come together really lovely. In the painting instructions, I'm guessing one of these actually is the air snorkel, and one of them is the exhaust for the diesel engines. I'm guessing the longer one is the air snorkel. Now, in the painting instructions, it tells you to paint these all the dark grey colour, but in the photographs I was looking at online, and bear in mind they're because of the age of this particular vessel, they're all black and white photographs. But in all the photographs of U-9, which is the one I'm building here, all of the photos show these being 2 different colours. The longer one, what I think is the air snorkel, appears to be a lot lighter than the other. So when I come to paint these, I'm going to do the air snorkel in the lighter grey that we've got on the hull, and the diesel in the darker grey, which I think will look quite nice anyway, but it appears to be more accurate than the painting instructions, from what I've gathered looking around. Now then, this fits into this little trough here, which then gets cemented into, let me just bring this into shot, gets cemented into this gap here. So that'll be underneath your gap. This sits in. And in the instructions it says don't apply any glue. So on the inside of the deck there's a couple of little plastic bits that sit down into there and basically holds this into place. And the idea is you can hinge this up and you can then hinge it down, and you can have it where you want. Now I'm going to have it up and I'm going to glue it into place, and I'm going to tell you why. I think it's really nice that they've thought about giving you some options, but once you've got that down into place, there is no way on earth you are getting that back up again. You'd have to go in with tweezers and risk scratching the paintwork. There's no way you're going to get that up again. I mean, if I go in with my knife, I'm possibly going to be able to do it, but for me, you're risking damaging the model. And once it's on display, I don't know, you're not going to want to show it up. I want to show it up so I can see the detail inside, and you can see more animation of the kit. It's the same with the masks. You can have them stowed or you can have them up. I'm going to have them up for exactly the same reason. It just adds some interest. So yeah, just an observation really on there. Right, let me get these glued together and then we'll have a look at what we're going to do. Okay, so just want to show you what we've done to fill that gap. I have a little drawer full of scraps of white plastic card. I never throw them away because they come in handy. Now, inevitably, I didn't have the right thickness of card for the gap, but what we've done, if I put the deck in here, so we had the deck in. I ended up laminating 2 different pieces of white card together to get the thickness. We then cut them out with scissors, so I had a strip, and we've basically put that into place there, and then glued it in, and we've removed the deck so that this can dry with no glue getting on the deck piece. So what will happen is when I come to sand flush the bow here, we'll sand that down at the same time, and effectively I've filled the gap without having to use any putty, and without having to, and it allows me to paint the deck, paint this, put them in place, and not have to worry about filling and then touching up. So for me, it's a quicker and cleaner solution than using filler. Okay, so we're just moving on with the build now. Now we've done the bits that go underneath the deck. I'm not going to fit the deck at this point because I want to get the sub-assemblies done before we paint. So we're flipping over now to page 7. We start building up the conning tower there. Now I've taken the parts off. The assembly comes together over 2 pages, as you can see, and we're going to build that as a sub-assembly and not attach it. Sorry, the postman just interrupted me. So yeah, I'm just looking at how this builds up, and the 2 parts here that we need to paint the insides of if we're going to have the hatch open, which I will. You can see very cleverly been able to mould in some hand wheels, which will look really nice under paint. But we've got a couple of ejector pin marks there, which under paint are going to be visible. So we're just going to deal with those. So if I move all these other components out of the way. So I'm using Mr. Surfacer for this. This is the 1200. There's 3 different ones. I have all 3 of them actually, but I tend to use this one the most. So just give it a good shake. First time I opened one of these Mr. Surfacers, I managed to spill it all over my new mat, which is what this is here, and rubbed off some of the grid and made a right mess. So I put it in a little foam holder just to make sure I don't knock it over again. There we go. I need to clean that lid up, don't I? Okay. So we will clean that lid up. That's gone a bit hard. Right, all I'm going to do is end of a cocktail stick and dab it in, and I want to put what looks like too much in, because what happens is as this dries it sinks back, and what I've found is if I do it so it's formed like a dome, then when it shrinks back there's less I need to put in, and I have to go back and do it maybe 2 or 3 times rather than half a dozen times, if that makes sense. And it smells lovely. No, I'm joking. No, I'm not. It's really nice. Okay. So we'll let that dry, and like I say, we'll probably have to go back to it at least once on the smaller ejector pin mark, and probably twice more on the larger one. Now these other ejector pin marks that you can see here won't be visible, so we only need to do the 2 near the hand wheels. Okay, so I'll put the conning tower bits to one side while the Mr. Surface is drying. So the next part in the build is to add this part to the stern, which is got the stern torpedo tubes in it. So that basically fits on there, and then we have a couple of torpedo tube covers. And just like on the front, I want to show one of the tubes open. The issue is, and it's the same issue with the front tube, is you're going to be able to see in that, and it won't quite look right because the part's not deep enough really. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to scratch build a little bit of tube to go around down the back, so that when you look in you can see some tube body, if you like. So this is 6.2 tube, and it just happens to be almost a perfect fit for the inside of the part. So if I show you, it's almost perfect. So if I ever so slightly thin out the inner wall, that'll look about right. So we'll sort that in a minute. But equally, I've got the same issue with the forward torpedo tube, that you're looking into a blank space. Now, interestingly, the opening for that torpedo is bigger, and this tube actually fits inside the torpedo tube opening, so that the two torpedo tubes have got different sizes, which seems a little odd, but that's the way it is. So what I've done is I've cut a section of tube off, and then I've sawn down the centre and just opened it up a little bit, peeled it back, so that there's a gap in it. The gap's then gone against the bulkhead. I'll show you here. Yeah. So the back's then the cut bit with the gap is against the bulkhead, so it can't be seen. So when you're looking at the, just turn this round, when you're looking in the torpedo tube, you can see there's a bit of, you're not looking into a blank void. You can see some torpedo tube wall there. So I think that looks a lot better. Where those two holes are, there's going to be a torpedo door there. So you're only really going to see it from certain angles, but when it catches, it's going to look right. So it's a small modification, but I think will make quite a bit of difference. So let me just move this out of the way a bit, and we'll have a look at how we're going to do these rear torpedo tubes. So we don't need too big a length, because it's going into, ultimately it'll be dark in there. So we don't need too big a length. So I'm just going to cut a length off. If you make it too big, then it's going to need a lot more support than if you were doing it short like this. This will be plenty, I would imagine. So yeah, okay, so cut that bit of tube off, and then I'm just going to run my knife around the inside of the tube and just thin that inner wall out a little bit, just to make sure that when I glue it in, you can't see any of the inner wall. And when this is painted, you're not going to see any of this, because it'll be right up against the edge. And we're just going to test fit that. That's beautiful. Yeah, that's spot on, that. Okay, so I'm just going to clean this part up and get the nubs off before we glue this in. I'll be right back. So the first step's a little tricky. We've got to make sure that we've got this perfectly aligned. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to put some liquid glue on the inside of the part, and then we're going to place that on top, and before it sets, we're just going to make sure it's nicely aligned all the way around, which it is, and then I'm just going to drop it onto my vise so that I can leave it alone. So there's probably, I'm going to put some around the outside edge now and just leave that for a sec. So there's probably enough of a bond there for that to hold, but I'm going to do a little bracket just to support it, bit of belt and braces. So while that's drying off, we can have a look at doing that. So what I want is a bracket that's going to run up this inside edge of the tube and then glue into the base of the part, so that a bit like that, so that I know that I've got a little bit of support for it. So if for some reason we do manage to knock it, it's not going to be a problem. So I'm just going to draw a line, and the card I'm using here is 1.5 milli thick. Okay, so we've cut what will be our little support bracket out, and because there is a lip with the kit part there, we need to just cut a little step into the part. So if I just show you there, there's a little step in the part there, which just goes over that, so that we can book this against the side of the pipe and glue it to the base there. So I'm just going to make sure this is perfectly flat. From cutting it off, because I use scissors rather than screwing it with a knife, and there's a slight curve in it, so I'm just going to make sure that's nice and flat. And we'll test fit that, and if that's all good, we can then glue that into place. Yeah, so I'm just going to make that step a little bit more pronounced. With us sanding it flat, we've lost a little bit of the depth of the step that I've cut in. Another test fit, and we should be there. Yeah, happy with that. So we'll get our glue. Just make sure it's touching base all the way along. Now that's adjusted, we can glue that down there, and we'll glue it to the part as well. That should give us all the rigidity we need, so even if you were to go around the inside of the tube with a paintbrush, it's not going to cause you any problems. So there you go. We now have one torpedo tube that looks like a torpedo tube. Right then, so let's wrap up this video. We have made two torpedo tubes, one which is sitting in the front there, and one that is now glued into place at the rear there. As you can see, we have now done some painting on this. So I've used a grey primer, and then I've used Humbrol 32, which is what the instructions call out for the deck. So what we did was we inserted the deck in and primed the whole thing with the deck dry fitted. The reason why I did that is I didn't want any primer building up on the inside edges of here, which might have caused me some fit issues when I came to fit the deck. So as the deck fits quite nicely, that seemed like the best way forward. Obviously before we primed it, we'd finished going around and cleaning it up, and as you can see here, this is where we had the little bit of white card, plastic card, just to fill that millimetre or so gap. You wouldn't even know it was there now, so that's great. And then once the primer was dry, we took the deck out and we painted that separately. That's been spray painted with that Humbrol paint, and then what we've done is we've done this deck area here, which in the instructions shows it as being in that same very dark grey. We will have to do some masking off then for the light grey later. And whilst we've got this dark grey out, I've used that to do some pre-shading on the hull, on the panel lines. So basically following the rivet lines and then following the ribs. So we've done that pretty much all the way down. Now the bottom half of the hull is going to be the same dark grey, so it'll probably disappear in the main. I was mainly interested in making sure I've got something in place for the pale grey, and that'll just help with the finished look, hopefully. So also, whilst we had the grey paint out, then what we did was we've painted the inside of this trough that sits inside the deck area, sort of there, where the exhaust and air snorkel come out from. So as I'd said earlier, on the black and white photographs that I've seen, they seem to be quite starkly two different shades. So I'm going to go with the light grey on the air snorkel. As you can see, I want the brackets to be the same dark, and then we're going to hand paint these in, well, with a brush obviously, the lighter grey, and then that can be put in place in when it's done. When we come to weather this, and we'll probably weather in this with some pastels, because this is the diesel exhaust, I imagine the back end of this would be quite mucky, so on the light grey, that little bit of weathering will really make this little part pop, I think. So that's where we've got to with that. We've started building up the conning tower. We've now filled and sanded the ejector mark in there, but we've not painted in there. So in the next video we'll have a look at finishing that off. Next thing to talk about, lastly, I think, is paint. So the instructions call out Humbrol 127, which is Ghost Grey. I don't particularly want to use that. It's the same colour as I've used on my Type 45 Destroyer, and as these are going to sit on a shelf together, I want it to be slightly different, and that's the only reason I'm not using this. You can airbrush this quite neatly. So I've decided to go with Vallejo 71050 light grey. Now the instructions call out a different number for that, but I don't have it, and this seems to be not far off in my mind, so we're going to use that. And as it's the air paint, that should airbrush on no problem at all. Yeah, so that's where we're up to. I hope you've enjoyed where we've got to so far, and I will take some photographs for the back end of the video so you can have a better look. The detail on this is lovely, and we're really starting to make it pop out. And this build is going to be more about the weathering than the building, I think, because it's quite a simple kit, although it's going to be really impressive when it's done. Okay everyone, thanks for watching, and I will see you on the part 3. Take care now.